There is a particular kind of person in this world who has probably been told their entire life that they feel too much, that they are too sensitive, too aware, too intense, and for a long time, they believed it. Carl Jung spent decades studying these exact individuals, and what he discovered was something that completely reframes what it means to be a deeply sensitive person. Not a burden, not a flaw, a transformation in progress. And today we are going to walk through exactly what that transformation looks like, why it happens the way it does, and what comes out the other side. Because what Jung found waiting at the end of this process was not what anyone expected. Let us start at the beginning, because to understand where this journey goes, you have to understand where it starts. Jung noticed a consistent pattern emerging inside his clinical practice. He kept encountering a very particular type of person. They were not dramatic. They were not in obvious crisis when they walked through his door. They were quiet, exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix, often apologetic, as though simply taking up space in a room required justification. He called them feeling-toned individuals, and the defining characteristic of this type was not just that they felt deeply. It was what they did with what they felt. When someone around them was in pain, they absorbed it. When someone was angry, they did not flinch away from the energy in the room, they took it in. When someone close to them lied, they did not shut down, they tried harder to make things work. Over and over, across relationship after relationship, these individuals functioned as what Jung described as the emotional shock absorbers of their social environments. The people everyone leaned on, not because they asked to be, but because something in the people around them instinctively sensed they could carry the weight. And they could. For a very long time, they could. But here is the thing Jung noticed that most people completely miss when they look at someone in this role. These individuals were not just absorbing, they were paying attention. Intensely, precisely at a level that most people never consciously reach, while they were quietly taking on the emotional weight of every room they entered. Some part of their mind was cataloging everything, every trigger, every pattern, every unspoken fear, hiding underneath the surface of the people around them. Not deliberately, not strategically, just naturally, the way a mind wired for that kind of depth cannot help but notice things. Jung called this differentiated perception. The capacity to read not just the obvious social signals that most people pick up on, but the unconscious emotional states running underneath them, the tension living beneath a forced smile, the desperation wearing the costume of confidence, the lie wrapped inside a perfectly reasonable sentence. These feeling-toned individuals picked up on all of it, often before the person they were reading even consciously knew what they were feeling themselves. And you might think that sounds like an advantage. Surely seeing that much, sensing that much, would make navigating life easier. It did not. And understanding why it did not is absolutely central to understanding everything else that follows. The reason it did not make life easier is deceptively simple. The people around these sensitives did not want to be seen that clearly. Most people carry things inside them they have never examined, fears they have never named, patterns they have never acknowledged, aspects of themselves they have buried so completely they would swear they do not exist. And when someone comes along who can see all of that without even trying, without even meaning to, the unconscious response from most people is not gratitude. It is not relief, it is panic, wearing the mask of anger. Jung had a precise name for this dynamic. He called it shadow projection. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is not your evil side or your worst self. It is everything you have not integrated, everything you were taught was unacceptable or dangerous to acknowledge. And when someone reflects your shadow back to you through their clear perception of you, your unconscious mind does not say thank you. It attacks the mirror. This is why so many feeling-toned individuals learn very early to stay quiet about what they see. They offer a gentle observation. They suggest that maybe something is worth looking at beneath the surface. And instead of a conversation, they get an explosion. Told they are creating problems, told they are too negative, too intense, too much, so they learn the lesson. They go quiet, they start questioning their own perceptions, and they stay quiet, sometimes for years. Jung documented what this sustained silencing does to someone over time. And it is genuinely disturbing to sit with, because the process he described is not just discouraging, it is disorienting at a foundational level. Imagine you see something clearly, you trust what you see, and then someone tells you with complete certainty and visible emotion that you are wrong, that you imagined it, that you are the problem, and they keep telling you this, and the people around them start nodding along. And eventually, you are not just doubting your perception of that specific situation anymore. You are doubting your capacity to perceive anything accurately. Jung called this state participation mystique, a French term borrowed from anthropology that he repurposed to describe the psychological condition of becoming so entangled in another person's projected reality that you lose the thread back to your own. You cannot locate where your perceptions end and their distortions begin. You start living inside a reality that was never actually yours. This is where so many of Jung's patients arrived when they first came to see him. Not confused because their perception was broken. Confused because their perception had been systematically undermined by people invested in having it stay quiet. But here is what Jung was watching develop underneath all of that confusion. The data collection had never stopped. While the feeling-toned individual was being told they were imagining things, their pattern recognition was still running. While they were apologizing for seeing too much, they were still seeing it. Every interaction, every inconsistency, every behavioral pattern across weeks and months and sometimes years. All of it being quietly organized by a mind that had been trained by necessity to notice everything, even when it had also been trained to say nothing about what it noticed. Jung tested this in his clinical work deliberately. He would bring colleagues to meet patients with this kind of perceptual sensitivity without giving those colleagues any background or context. And within minutes, these patients could describe with striking accuracy the emotional wounds those colleagues carried, the relational patterns they defaulted to, the fears they had brought into the room without announcing them. Jung described what he observed as not remotely mystical. It was the result of paying attention at a level most people never sustain, accumulated over years of having no other option. And then something shifted. Jung identified a turning point that appeared across case after case with almost identical structure, even when all the surface details were completely different. He drew on a Greek concept called enantiodromia, the psychological principle of reversal. The moment when something pushed to its extreme flips suddenly into its opposite. The moment that had always been coming, even when nobody, including the feeling-toned individual themselves, saw it approaching. It was never the first betrayal that triggered it, not the second or the third. It came when the person reached a specific realization they could not take back. They had known, not just suspected, known. The instincts they had been silencing had been accurate all along. They had chosen again and again, out of genuine care and genuine hope, to believe in the best version of the person in front of them. And then came the moment when that choice was no longer available, when the evidence could no longer be reinterpreted or explained away, when the gap between what they had allowed themselves to believe and what they had always actually known finally collapsed completely. And what happened at that moment was not what anyone around these individuals expected. The people who had been underestimating them expected emotional collapse, tears, rage, the kind of visible devastation that follows a major betrayal. That is what those caught in projection always expect from the person they have spent years telling that their perceptions were wrong. What they got instead was silence, a calm so total and so complete that it genuinely disturbed the people in the room. These individuals went quiet. And then they began to speak slowly, without drama, without needing anything from the person they were speaking to. They laid out with surgical precision everything they had observed, not as an attack, not as an attempt to wound, simply as an accurate accounting of what they had seen and understood for a very long time. Jung described this moment as one of the most striking psychological shifts he witnessed across his entire career, not because of what was said, but because of the quality of knowing underneath it, a knowing that communicated without any ambiguity that this person had understood the situation completely for far longer than anyone realized and had simply chosen until now to say nothing. That is what made it so devastating for the person on the receiving end. Not anger, not cruelty, knowledge, quiet, complete, fully arrived knowledge, finally speaking. Jung called this shadow integration under extreme pressure, and it is crucial to understand what he meant by that because it reframes the entire experience. For most feeling-toned individuals, the parts of themselves buried in the shadow were not cruelty or aggression. They were strength. They were the right to trust their own perception, the right to take up space, the right to say what they see and act on what they know. These qualities had been buried not because they were dangerous, but because every time they surfaced, they got punished, so they went underground. And now, in this moment of enantiodromia, they came back, not violently but permanently. Jung followed many of these individuals after their transformation because he expected, based on everything he understood about human psychology, to see some regression. He expected the old patterns to reassert themselves eventually. He expected them to drift back toward people-pleasing, toward doubt, toward the familiar dynamics they had spent years inside. What he observed instead was something he described with genuine surprise across his private notes. These individuals did not go back. He called what he witnessed psychological completion, a restructuring so thorough that the mechanisms that had made them vulnerable simply no longer functioned the same way. You cannot destabilize someone who has fully arrived inside their own perception. You cannot pull someone back into a distorted reality once they have dissolved their participation in it. You cannot rebuild the same prison around someone who now recognizes the architecture of it from the outside. These transformed individuals became, in Jung's description, selectively conscious in their feeling. They did not lose their depth or their capacity for genuine connection. If anything, that capacity deepened, but it became directional rather than reflexive. They stopped giving their emotional energy away by default and started giving it deliberately to the people and situations that genuinely deserved it. The effects on the social systems these individuals had been holding together were immediate and significant. When someone who has been quietly absorbing and stabilizing an entire relational ecosystem steps back, the system does not simply adjust, it has to reckon with what it had been outsourcing. The people who relied on the imbalance were forced to confront what they had never had to confront before, because someone else had always quietly absorbed the consequences for them. Those responses were rarely graceful. But Jung noticed something telling about how the transformation was received by different kinds of people. Those with genuinely unhealthy relational patterns felt the change before a single word was spoken. Something in their instinctive psychological radar registered that there was no purchase here anymore, nothing to project onto, nothing to destabilize. Conversely, people operating from a place of genuine integrity felt safer around these transformed sensitives than they had around almost anyone else, because they sensed something equally important. This person sees clearly, and they are not using what they see against me. Jung was deeply honest about the responsibility embedded in this transformation, and I think this is one of the most important things he documented. Someone who has developed the perceptual capacity we have been describing, someone who has spent years mapping the emotional and psychological interiors of the people around them, someone who can read a room at that depth, theoretically has access to an enormous amount of psychological leverage. They could, if they chose to, cause real damage with what they know, and they choose not to. That choice, Jung believed, was not weakness or naivety. It was the highest expression of the individuation process, the choice to use understanding as a tool for freedom rather than a weapon for control. The choice to see everything and still lead with compassion. From a position of genuine self-respect this time, not desperate need. He also issued clear warnings about two patterns that could derail the transformation before it completed. The first was what he called inflation. The feeling-toned individual, finally seeing the truth clearly after years of having their perception undermined, becomes so identified with that clarity that they slide from wisdom into superiority. They start believing they are simply the one who sees while everyone else stumbles in the dark, and gradually they become something uncomfortably close to what they once suffered from, using insight as a tool of dominance rather than understanding. The second pattern Jung documented was withdrawal, using hard-won perception as a justification to disengage from everyone and everything, building walls and calling them healthy boundaries, stopping trust entirely and calling it discernment. From the outside, this can look convincingly like healing. From the inside, Jung was direct about what it actually is, a quieter and more internally justified version of the same prison. True integration looked like neither of these. True integration looked like someone who could walk into a difficult room, see everything clearly, feel everything fully, and still choose to stay present, still choose to extend care, not from need or compulsion or the fear of what happens if they do not, but from a genuinely free choice grounded in self-respect. Jung described this final stage using the language of alchemy, which he returned to throughout his mature work, as a way to describe psychological processes that linear clinical language could not quite capture. The calcinatio, the alchemical burning away of everything borrowed, every identity constructed to survive rather than to genuinely live. And the coagulatio, the solidifying into a new and more stable form, more coherent, more durable, precisely because of what it passed through to get there. Not destruction, transformation, the soul moving through exactly the process it was built for. This brings me to the part I want you to sit with, because it is the part Jung himself seemed most moved by when he wrote about these cases. The brutal fate of the deeply sensitive person is not what happens after the transformation. The transformation, as Jung documented it comprehensively, is the best thing that ever happens to these individuals. The brutal part is everything that precedes it. The years of carrying weight that was never yours to carry, the years of silencing something that was actually your sharpest and most valuable capacity, the years of being told that the most precise and trustworthy instrument you possessed was a defect. That is the brutal part, and it would be dishonest to minimize it. But Jung's documentation offers something important in response to that brutality. He found, consistently and almost universally across these cases, that the individuals who completed this transformation did not ultimately regret the path they walked. Not because the pain was meaningful in some abstract sense, not because suffering is secretly good for you, but because the specific pressure of that experience had produced something that could not have been built any other way. Something that had been tested so thoroughly by what it survived that it knew its own strength with absolute certainty. Jung's final and most essential observation about these individuals is the one I want to leave you with. He believed that the journey of the feeling-toned person was not from sensitivity toward numbness. It was not from openness toward defensiveness. It was from unconscious absorption toward conscious choice. Starting from feeling everything without understanding what is happening or how to navigate it, arriving at feeling everything and choosing from full awareness what genuinely deserves your energy and your care. That distinction is everything, because the arrival point is not a less sensitive version of the person. It is not someone who has learned to feel less or care less or show up less fully. It is someone whose sensitivity has finally been integrated consciously, someone who can feel the full depth of what they feel and still remain anchored in their own perception of reality. Someone who can love completely and still know the difference between love and self-erasure. Someone who can see everything in a room and choose how to respond to it, rather than simply absorbing it and hoping for the best. Jung believed the world did not need more feeling-toned individuals who had learned to make themselves smaller to survive. It needed more of them who had completed the transformation. People who could carry enormous depth without being destabilized by it. People who could see through a situation completely and still choose compassion. People who had earned their psychological stability through lived experience rather than inherited certainty. If you see yourself inside what Jung documented, if the patterns described here carry the specific weight of recognition rather than just intellectual interest, then let me say something directly. Your sensitivity has never been the problem. The problem has been the way you were taught to suppress and doubt it. The very fact that you are here, examining your own psychology with this quality of honest attention, already tells you something important. You are not at the beginning of this process, you are inside it. The question Jung ultimately posed to his patients was not whether the transformation would happen. He had watched it happen too many times across too many different lives to doubt it. The question was only whether it would happen consciously or whether you would continue letting life force it through one painful episode at a time. Conscious transformation means choosing to trust your perceptions before circumstances make trusting them unavoidable. It means doing the internal work before a crisis makes it mandatory. It means holding what you are, fully and without apology, rather than waiting for the moment you finally have no other choice. That is harder in some ways. It requires a particular kind of courage to claim your own perceptions when the people around you have spent years insisting they are wrong. But it also belongs to you in a way that forced transformation never quite does. You are not waiting to become something different. You are in the process of becoming what you already actually are. And that process, Jung found, leads somewhere specific. To someone who can no longer be pulled into a reality that was never theirs. To someone who can no longer be broken by the discovery of what they always suspected was true. To someone who knows exactly how solid the ground beneath them is, because they built it themselves, from everything that tried to take it away.